Hey guys, here's your anatomy chapter. So this should be chapter 6 in your book. So hopefully this hasn't been too difficult of a subject for you. If you're not used to it, it does take a lot of studying and there's a whole lot of strategies to try to remember these things. I'll try to go over them as I go through these slides. So just a little recap. Anatomy is your study of body structures. Physiology is the study of body function. Pathophysiology, which is a little more specific and super important for you guys to learn, is the study of how disease process affects the normal functions and the abnormal functions of the human body. Because different disease processes and pathos, they affect the body in different ways. So we'll go over that a little more in chapter 7. So your cells are made up kind of building blocks. The smallest basic element is made of atoms. So hydrogen and oxygen are very, very big in your body, and they're the building blocks for a lot of cells that make any physical thing. Not just you, but other forms of life as well. Macromolecules or biomolecules. These are many atoms that are joined together to make a structure. DNA. I'm sure any of you guys who have taken biology or in biology currently would know something about this. So this is your deoxyribonucleic acid. This is your long chains of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygen that code for certain features. So this is what helps make you specific. An organelle, this is a tiny structure within a cell that carries out the functions of the cell. So that's like your ribosomes and all your little pieces of the cell. Mitochondria, say it with me, it's the powerhouse of the cell. Eye roll. But its true function is to produce energy for the cell. Your cells themselves, they're the basic unit of a living system that carry out many functions, and they have to be present for you in order to live and grow. We're a multi-celled organism. We don't thrive on just a single type of cell or a single cell alone. It takes a lot because we're very complicated. Tissues, this is a step above cells. So these are very similar cells that work together to perform a function, i.e. like your cardiac cells. They're one of very few cells in your body that generate electricity. So organs. These are composed of several types of tissues, but they perform a specific function. So this is those electric cardiac cells and your muscular cardiac cells coming together to generate a heartbeat. So you have the electrical component that fires and tells the muscles to contract. So those kind of work together. Organ system. So this is a system that performs a specific function. So this is those organs working together. So it depends on how you read it. I know for your book specifically, for the cardiac system, it involves your heart, your pulmonary circulation as well. Not pulmonary, excuse me. Your circulatory system as well. So they kind of go hand in hand. And then organism, this is you. This is a complex being that's made of separate systems functioning as one. Alright, so if you've never seen them, here's some of your diagrams. Personally, I'm not big on testing people on these just because, while yes, they're important for EMT at the very basic level, it's just important that you know they exist. The biggest thing you need to know about cells is that they have a nucleus, and the nucleus is the brain. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and that we as humans do not have cell walls. We have cell membranes. So cells are made of atoms, macromolecules, organelles, DNA, and mitochondria. Cells make tissues, tissues make organs, organs make organ systems make me, the organism. Just an easy way to remember it. So in all, you have 11 body systems. You have your integumentary system, which is your skin, your skeletal system, which is just as it sounds, your skeleton and your bones, the muscular system, which is all about muscles, your nervous system, which is your nerves, brain, spinal cord, all that fun stuff, your endocrine system. This comprises of your thyroid, your reproductive glands, so ovaries or testes, depending on if you're male or female. There's actually a bunch that go into this. Your pituitary gland, there's your adrenal glands. There's a lot that goes into your endocrine system. It's its own beast. Your cardiovascular system, which is all about the heart and circulation. Your lymphatic system, this is a huge part of your immune system. Your lymphatic system actually helps you fight off disease. It also has other functions, which we'll get to later. So your respiratory system, also a very important system for you to be able to live. This is your lungs. Kind of ties in with your heart anyway, but it talks more about your lungs and your airway. So everything from your mouth down into your trachea and into your lungs. Your digestive system, so obviously this is from your esophagus onwards. all the way throughout to the end. Your urinary system, so your bladder, your ureters, kidneys, all that fun stuff. Bladder. I think I said that already. Disregard that. But anyway, and your reproductive organs. So your integumentary system includes your skin, hair, and nails. It also includes your sweat glands. So the whole function of the integumentary system, the biggest takeaway, is it performs a protective barrier that aids in temperature regulation for homeostasis. I would just like to put an emphasis right here. Aids in temperature regulation. It likes to show up on registry a whole lot, so just keep that in mind. Alright. You guys have to excuse me, I'm still trying to get used to this. Alright, so some skin anatomy. So over here you've kind of got your basic skin layer. Again, it's good for you to know, but just know that your epidermis right here is your outermost layer. Your dermis or derma, depending on what you read it in. This is where all of your nerves, sweat glands, hair, all that is. Technically, you have two more layers. So your hypodermis, this is where you have adipose tissue or fat. It's also kind of where some of your capillary beds and such are. And then your subcutaneous layer, so this is going to be closest to your muscles. So your skeletal system, so of course this is bones that make up your skeleton. The big function is this gives the body structure, provides protection for some of your vital organs, and it helps produce blood cells. Yes, your blood cells are actually produced in your skeleton for the most part, and it stores minerals. So your long bones especially, so like your femur, your humerus, all of those, they are very responsible for creating your red blood cells. So again, I would like you to at least have an idea of where most of these bones are, but it's very meticulous to go over every single one of them. I know you guys have been doing a whole lot with anatomy, but it is so important to do anatomy, physiology, and pathophys. They are very important to what we do. Registry loves those questions, and if you're going to continue to do anything in the medical field, it is very, very important that you have a base foundation of all of them. So the big thing with the skull that I need you to kind of take home is you're going to have four kind of separations in the skull that are important. So your parietal bone, so this is this part right here. So this houses a pretty good portion of your brain. Your occipital bone, so this is the very back of your skull. So the back of your brain is actually responsible for vision and a few other important things that we'll talk about later. You need to know that your temporal bone is down here. This is actually where hearing and everything is stored right behind it on the brain. And then you have your frontal bone. So if you've taken any kind of psych, you'll know that your frontal lobe is very responsible for your personality and kind of how you think. And we'll go over that more in psych, and we'll also talk about it some more with psych issues. Okay, so I would like you guys to know these two bones very specifically. So the atlas and the axis, C1 and C2. The atlas, think about in mythology what Atlas did. He held the world, right? So C1, your atlas, right here, very important bone. If you break this vertebra, there's a very high chance that you're going to knock out your respiratory drive and you're probably not going to survive that injury. C2, also very important. This is the axis. So you can rotate things on an axis, right? So C2 is what's responsible for actually rotating the head. C1, your atlas, holds the head, just like Atlas held the world. The other thing that's really important on this slide, so a good way to remember is you eat breakfast at 7. So this is your amount of cervical vertebrae. Sorry, it's very hard to spell with a mouse. Thoracic, so you eat lunch at 12. And then for lumbar, you eat dinner at 5. And then your sacrum, there are 5 of those, and your coccyx, there are 4 of those. So It's good to know. They do like to ask spinal column questions. So there's also a saying that I like to tell people. I like to tell people when it comes to your cervical vertebrae, any breaks below C5, stay alive. So the reason I say that is because most of your bones that innervate vital organs such as your lungs and your heart, they are innervated right above C5. So if you have a break at 5 or below, you have a good chance of survival. Versus any of these other 5, well, 4 up here, your C1 through C4, it's harder to survive because these are responsible for innervating your lungs, your diaphragm, very important things. And I will also say C7 specifically is responsible for your intercostal muscles. So these are your accessory muscles that help you breathe in addition to your diaphragm. So while yes, if you break C7 or C6 or C5, that could affect it, it's not as likely. And it's not going to be as detrimental as if you break C1 through C4. But remember, anything that breaks in the neck is potentially going to result in paralysis somewhere. So just food for thought. And then your lumbar ones they have what they call dermatomes. You should probably look them up. They tell you where, if you break one of these, specifically what's affected. They're just good to know. The muscular system. So this includes, of course, muscles and joints. Your big function here is that they provide the body with movement via electrical impulses, and they also balance your chemical processes within their cells. So there's a whole lot of fluid shift in muscles, believe it or not. So the other big thing you need to know is tendons and ligaments. So we'll get to those in a second. So your body at any given point is always shifting your fluids. So those fluids include sodium and potassium. There has to be a balance between them. So your muscles especially harp on this. They also need calcium. Calcium is kind of the gatekeeper for those. And so is magnesium. With those two things, they lock onto your sodium ion pump in cells, and they kind of help you shift. You always have potassium in the cell, so your chemical abbreviation is K+, is in the cell, which we'll talk more about this in patho as well. And then Na, which is sodium, is usually outside the cells. You have to have a balance inside and outside for sodium and potassium. I apologize for this atrocious handwriting. My goodness. So the other thing, so tendons, they're your fibrous connective tissues that attach your muscle to bone. So keep in mind, muscle to bone. Very famous registry question. And then your ligaments connect bone to bone. So they connect bone to bone. So I am not going to ask you to learn every single muscle in the human body. You would be here so long just studying this alone. There's actually whole college classes dedicated to kinesiology and how muscles and such work. And trust me, it is very grueling. So if you want to do like physical therapy or something as a career, I highly recommend it. If you're not going to do anything that is very specific to muscles, these are your main groups. So just please know these. Your biceps, your abdominals, your quadriceps, your deltoids, your trapezius, triceps, calves, and masseter and pectoralis muscles. Those are kind of your big ones for EMT. If you want to go a little deeper, I do have some of the deeper ones here, but they're mainly just here for your viewing pleasure or just if you think you would like to go further into this. Your nervous system. So this is your brain, spinal cord, and your nerves and meninges and all that stuff. So your function here, this receives and coordinates information so that the body can respond through chemical reactions or electrical impulses. I will tell you, I love the nervous system. I like to read about it a lot. It's very interesting in how it uses electricity and chemicals to get its point across. So, your nervous system is not as big as you would think. So, if you ever get to go to a bodies exhibit, so what they do is they take people who've donated their body to science and they kind of strip them down layer by layer and organ system by organ system, and everything is very, very well preserved. If you ever get the chance to look at the pictures from those or go to a bodies exhibit, I highly recommend it. It helps so much with anatomy. And it's so interesting to see how just this thing right here, the brain, is responsible for you, and this organ does so much. It is your control center. So your spinal cord takes information from the brain and it sends it out through these nerves. So your action potential, which is your nerve impulse, could start somewhere like here. So this is about where your hippocampus is. And say it sends information down the spinal cord and says, hey, I need you to start shivering, but we're only wearing a short sleeve shirt today, so these nerves out here and out over here need to start contracting to keep us warm. It goes down these tracks and it tells those, hey, we need to start moving, we need to start shivering, we need to generate heat. It's just an example. But there are many, many parts of the brain and a lot of moving pieces in this. But you have these things called neurons, and those electrical impulses will hit each neuron and they'll cause a chemical reaction, or they'll send more electricity down the chain, so to speak, and cause these reactions. So these are some of your main parts of your brain. Your brain stem, which is down here, is very much responsible for your respiratory drive. If you lose your brain stem, or if you get some intracranial pressures, such as like from a brain bleed or from a head injury or anything, and your brain starts getting pressure applied to it, it'll start herniating downwards. So it'll push into the hole that's in your skull where the brainstem is, and it'll push your brain down to that hole, and it results in what we call herniation into the foramen magnum. So that's the name of the hole. And your patient will suffer many different abnormalities, to include seizures, to include altered mental status, to include even death right away, but it'll definitely take out their respiratory drive as well. So if anything puts pressure on that brain stem, or it gets taken out by any means, that person is not going to live. You have to have that in order to live. Even on a ventilator, it's not going to sustain them. But anyway, sidetrack. So for your brainstem, you have your pons, your medulla oblongata. Yes, I know if you've ever watched Waterboy, we like to make fun of that. Your midbrain, your cerebellum, your pituitary gland, your hypothalamus, and your thalamus. And then the whole brain itself is the cerebrum. So I also, again, included some of those dermatomes I was talking about. This isn't all of them. This is just your main ones. So this kind of goes down the list of what each part of your spinal column will affect. So as we talked about a few slides ago, your cervical spine vertebrae are very, very important for life. So C1 is responsible for movement, for holding your head, neck in line. If you get hit at C2, it can cause damage to the nerve that innervates the diaphragm, so that person won't be able to breathe. So C3, C4, it'll affect your deltoids and biceps, so you won't be able to really move your upper extremities. C5, if that's affected or anything above it, it affects how you extend your wrist. 6 and 7 are responsible for your triceps, but they also help innervate where your accessory muscles are for breathing, so keep that in mind. And then C8 is very specific to your hand. So, oh, I just realized that says C8. No, that's supposed to be 7. Forget that this says C8. No, this all goes up to 7. So T1 through 12, till you get to T5 and T6, this affects your thoracic nerves. So that would be this area that's marking out, the blue area. Your T6 and 7 here affects your chest muscles, so it'll be harder for you to be able to expand your chest or move anything in your chest. It also affects your abdominal muscles, so any kind of bending, leaning, anything like that would be out the door. So you can still live with deficits in your thoracic area, and even some at the very bottom part of your spinal area and the cervical area, but it's not going to be as likely. Your lumbar spine, so you will be paralyzed from the waist down if you take any kind of damage here. So this is very responsible for all of your leg movements, leg muscles, all of that. Your sacrum, you can live with damage to your sacrum, but it can affect your bowel and bladder, and it can also affect your sexual function, so it would be hard for you to be able to conceive. And then your coccygeal, if you break it, it's not really a big deal, it's just super painful. Your endocrine system, this is my favorite organ system. It is very complicated, but it's one of the things, if you like it and you hone in on it, it is very nerd-worthy. So this includes your pituitary gland, your pineal gland, your thyroid gland, your parathyroid glands, which are on the back of your thyroid, your thymus gland, which, believe it or not, is actually behind the manubrium of your sternum, which is the very top, if you didn't know that. The adrenal glands, your pancreas, your testes, or ovaries. The function is to regulate the metabolic and hormonal activities in the body. Hormones, they are your messenger chemicals that start in an organ and go to another organ, or your target site, to help control and coordinate activities through your body. So, for example, your pituitary gland sends TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, which goes, guess where? To the thyroid, to tell it how to work and tell it to speed up or slow down your metabolism. So, I can't wait to get to this chapter. It is my absolute favorite. So here's your visual map of what's all involved with your endocrine system. So your pineal gland, which is up here, kind of close to the brainstem. Your pituitary gland is this nice little itty-bitty broccoli-looking thing in your brain. So your thyroid is here. Your parathyroid glands would be, it's like 2 or 3 of them. That's not a really good color. Let me find a brighter color. They'd be like this. It's like 6 to 8 little dots on the back of your thyroid in these areas. Your thymus, so this is one of the few organs right here that if you ever get to a certain age, it will actually shrink and it can actually disappear. So your thymus is very important when you're a child all the way up till you're a teenager. So you guys at your age currently, if your thymus is still around, it's not very big. It starts out about the size of probably a walnut, and it shrinks in size. So you guys, right now, it's probably at most the size of an acorn at the current age you are, if you're between 15 to 20. And it will continue to shrink until it either vanishes or it's hardly anything. It'll get as small as a pea. But it's very important not only with endocrine function when you're younger, but it's very important with your lymphatic system as well. So it helps you make your early cells to fight disease when you're younger. Your pancreas, so this nice long hammer looking thing here. Your pancreas has everything to do with diabetes when people talk about actual true diabetes. So the pancreas actually functions in 2 organ systems. It is in the endocrine system to help regulate blood sugar levels and such, but it's also in the digestive system to help you break down foods to use in your bloodstream and make those sugars. Your adrenal glands, these nice little gnome caps here, they are responsible for a lot of things to include blood pressure and such. And of course, your sex hormones. So male, this produces testosterone and all the things that make men men in scientific terms. For females, we have ovaries. Your ovaries are responsible for helping regulate estrogen and things of that nature in order to help give you your female characteristics. And then if you're pregnant, you have a placenta during pregnancy that regulates all the hormonal things for the baby. Your cardiovascular system. So of course this includes your heart, your arteries, and your veins. The function is to pump blood through the body and transport nutrients, oxygen, and waste throughout the body. And, well, technically the waste, it's moving them towards the kidneys or liver or wherever to get rid of the waste. So, if you guys do not learn any other diagram in this class, know this one. I promise you, Red Street loves pictures of this. We also like it. Please, please, please look over this, because you could see it as a bonus question, you could see it as an actual question. The heart is so very important. So we already know that anything marked in blue here usually carries deoxygenated blood, typically. And most things that you see marked out in red having to do with the cardiac system in any A&P book, usually if it's red, it's oxygenated blood. Well, the heart is very unique because it has a vein that carries oxygenated blood, and it has an artery that carries deoxygenated blood. So, when you're looking at this, it's not marked out, surprisingly. So this is going to be your pulmonary vein. Which is the only vein that has oxygenated blood. It brings it to the left atria, to bring it to the left ventricle to then be circulated through the aorta throughout the body. Your pulmonary artery I know it says pulmonary trunk here, but it's your pulmonary artery. This big blue thing here is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood. So the way your whole cardiac system works, we start over here on the right side. So blood goes in here. Once it's made its cycle. Or it can come in here if it's coming from the top. Either way, your inferior and superior vena cava here, this nice long blue thing, feed your right atrium. Blood will come in here, and it will go this way. So it will go from your right atrium into your right ventricle. And then once the right side of the heart beats, it will then circulate up this way. It will go into the pulmonary artery to be carried to the lungs. Once your blood goes to the lungs, it then makes a full circle, comes back this way to the pulmonary vein, and enters the left atria. So once in the left atrium, you have now oxygenated blood. It will then come from here down this way. Once the atria contracts, it will go into the left ventricle. Once in the left ventricle and the ventricle contracts when it's going into systole, it will pump this out through the aorta and then out into circulation. So, of course, it'll come out here, 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 and anywhere else along the aortic tract. So, it would probably be in your best interest to take note of everything I just told you, because I promise you, you will see it again. Which now that I'm thinking about it, I should have probably told you guys this on the last slide, but I'll bring up this point here. So, we see how you have your blue and red tracks here. I want to talk to you briefly about heart failure, just because you'll see it again in the cardiac section. So, if you think about this logically, your heart is a whole water pump. And this is moving everything into circulation to move water throughout your system. Well, not just water, but blood. But you get what I'm saying. So, sorry if you guys hear my dogs growling in the background. They are very playful and very young. But I digress. So, if you have right-sided heart failure, which is where the right ventricle does not want to work anymore and it becomes really floppy, you will have fluid backup, because if it can't pump, where does it go? Well, think about like trying to push water through a straw. It goes from a garden hose to a straw. It's going to back up, right? Because it's not going to be able to push all of that through. And it's also going to up your blood pressure. So, all of the blood that would have come here is going to back up this way, which means it will then back up to the body. So you'll get what's called edema, which is excess fluid. And it will build up in the body. It specifically will go, for the most part, to the legs. It will go to the legs, the sacrum, pretty much everything below this line I'm drawing right here. So all this will back up with fluid. So it'll cause people to have weeping sores. It'll cause them to just really overall be pretty miserable, and it adds a lot of weight to them as well, because they're putting so much, I'm going to say water, but that's a very loose term. They're putting fluid in the third space between their cells. So instead of being in circulation, it's between your muscles, your skin, your fat cells, things in places that it doesn't belong. On the flip side of things, if the left side of your heart starts to fail, guess where it backs up? And this is where it's really dangerous. If for whatever reason your left side fails and becomes floppy, everything backs up to your lungs. So all this plasma and fluid is going to back up into your lungs, and it can cause you to drown. So that's called pulmonary edema. I just wanted to point that out, just so early on you kind of have an idea. Oops, let's put the Y there. Edema. We'll talk more about it in cardiac, but I think it's important for you guys to go ahead and start looking into that. And then this just also shows like your common arteries and veins. Your lymphatic system. So we don't talk about this one a whole lot. It's important, but for the EMT level, you only need a bare bones knowledge for it. So this includes your tonsils and adenoids. Yes, they actually have a function. Your thymus gland that I mentioned earlier, your spleen, your lymph nodes, and your lymphatic vessels. So the function of your lymphatic system is to maintain the body's fluid balance and contribute to the immune system and its responses. So you ever go to the doctor and they tell you your lymph nodes are swollen? Well, that's because in that area you're fighting an infection somewhere. So they'll swell and fill with fluid, and lymph is the name of that fluid in that part of your system, and it's its whole circulatory system of its own. So this is what your lymphatic system looks like, all this green. So it kind of, as you can see, links in just about anywhere. So your spleen, it helps filter the blood and remove cellular debris. It also is responsible for making macrophages, which help eat viruses and infection. Your lymph nodes, they also filter lymph, just on a much smaller scale. So that's kind of their function. But as you can see, there's a whole lot more function in here than just what I mentioned. You can read up on it if you'd like, but those are the big things you really need to know about the lymphatic system at this level. Your respiratory system, super important. So this is how we oxygenate our blood. So when we get to patho, we're going to talk more about aerobic and anaerobic metabolism. So aerobic and anaerobic. Your aerobic metabolism is in the presence of oxygen. So this means your cells are oxygenated, they're happy, they can make ADP, ATP, all the things they need in order to survive and carry out their function. Anaerobic is without oxygen. We cannot survive on anaerobic metabolism very long. So anaerobic metabolism is a compensatory response. So our body can survive on it very briefly, but it is to our detriment. So if you don't have oxygen, you have CO2, which is carbon dioxide. And too much of this is really bad. Oxygen is fine. We need it for our heme molecules in order to help move oxygen through the body to help them do their processes and keep our cells happy. But if you have too much CO2, you have this carbon chain bonded to your oxygen. Let me finish that. Oh, it's bothering me. And this one. And that one. Sorry. Little moment there. But your respiratory system helps you get rid of that CO2 and blow it off. We have to have carbon dioxide. It's our waste product. So we have a very delicate balance with trees. Trees create oxygen. We breathe the oxygen in. In exchange, we breathe out carbon dioxide. So when you hear me talk about gas exchange, this is what I mean. Oxygen comes in, carbon dioxide goes out. We feed the trees feed us. So here's kind of a picture of that gas exchange I was just talking about. So it happens in your alveoli, in your lungs. So these are teeny tiny little grape-looking structures, as you can see here. So this is where gas exchange happens. So it has arterial and venous capillaries here. So arterial, venous. And you'll bring in your oxygen from the outside environment, hopefully, and then you will get rid of your carbon dioxide, like in this picture here. So as we breathe in, we bring it in, we bring in our oxygen, we circulate through our body. As a waste product for us, carbon dioxide comes out and goes out into the atmosphere. Too much carbon dioxide is a bad thing. I don't want to say that too much oxygen isn't a bad thing, but it is. And we'll talk about that much later when we talk about respiratory. Your digestive system. So this includes your oral cavity, your pharynx, your esophagus, your stomach, small intestine, large intestine, or colon, whatever you prefer, potato, I don't care. Liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. The whole function is to help you bring in food, digest it, and absorb the nutrients from your foods into your body. It also helps you remove waste. So this is your entire digestive tract. Food comes in through the food hole, well, your mouth, and then it comes in through the esophagus, goes down in here, and into the stomach. The stomach has a bunch of acid here. Said stomach acid will help break down food, hopefully. It will then move it as a semi-solid into, this part's actually your duodenum and jejunum. It will start to pull some of the fluids out, and it'll start moving through all of this spaghetti here, which is your small intestine, and it will eventually move into your large intestine. So one of the first questions I usually get when I pull up this slide is your appendix. Yes, it is this teeny tiny thing. Does it have function? Well, some scientists think that we did have function with it at one time, and it used to be a very important part of our digestive system. However, now it does not hold much, if any, relevance. They have found it is actually part of the lymphatic system. It's kind of like a lymph node, but it's not big enough to make a huge difference. However, they seem to think that when we were less evolved, like cavemen, we actually ate more grass and leafy things, kind of like cows do. And they thought this may have been like a secondary stomach to help digest plant-based material. But they can't prove that for fact. So, just one of those nerdy things I read about that I thought I'd share. Anyway, so once out of the small intestine, it comes into the large intestine, where it compacts all that goopy goodness into poop. And then it then comes out the poop chute, i.e. your anus. Alright, your urinary and or renal system. I will tell you guys, this is my least favorite organ system for many, many reasons, mostly because of the chemical balance part. I'm not going to bore you to death with that. We're just going to get the important things out of the way for EMT level. So, of course, this includes your kidneys, your ureters, your bladder, and your urethra. So, the function of your urinary system is to filter waste from the blood and remove them from the body. Pretty self-explanatory. So, your kidneys actually hold a lot of blood. So, at any given point, you have an artery and a vein here. These are your renal arteries and renal veins. They come into each kidney, and they send blood in here to be filtered and removed. So it comes in through the arterial part, goes through the kidney, it goes through this whole big, long, boring chemical process we'll talk about later, because I do not want to bore you to death with this. And then it will come out through your veins and back towards your heart into your circulatory system. But while your blood is in here, these things called nephrons and Lipid-Henle, all these different things work together to help pull salts and other things that you don't need at that time out of your kidneys, out of your blood, and turn it into waste. It then adds it with extra water. It also pulls out extra glucose and such too. So this is kind of where diabetics get in trouble with peeing all the time, because their kidneys are constantly trying to pull all the sugar out, and sugar chains are huge. But anyway, so once it's been turned into urine, it will then come down these little tubes here and into the bladder, which, believe it or not, your bladder can get to be the size of a football before you start showing any signs of it. So your bladder, ideally, when you start feeling an urge, is holding about 50 mLs of water. So it's not very much. So, like right here, you can't see it because I'm off screen. I have a Coke can, and it's a 12-ounce Coke can, your standard Coke can. That's 355 mLs. So, just a little over that is what you can hold in your bladder. Ideally, before you start feeling the stretch mechanism and it telling you, hey, I need to pee. Well, some people get what's called urinary retention, and this goes from this size to this size. And you can actually see their bladder when it's this distended a lot of times. So it can hold up to, I think, 1,500 mLs. I'll have to fact check that one. But it's over a liter of fluid before it will rupture. But anyway, I digress. So once you've got your urine in here and your stretch receptors say, hey, I need to pee, hopefully you make it to the bathroom and you pee and get rid of it. It goes to the urethra and out into the world. Your reproductive system. So yes, you guys are going to basically get another family life lesson. I apologize, but if you're going to go into medicine, you're going to have to be mature about this. So for males, they have the testes, epididymis, vas deferens, penis, seminal vesicles, and prostate gland. So their whole thing is sperm production. So for us females, we have ovaries, fallopian tubes, or oviducts. We have our uterus, and I know it's cut off here, but also your cervix. And vaginal canal. And then we also have our labias. So, labia majora. Oops, let me make that note. And minora. The whole function here for us is to create life. So we make eggs. And carry out pregnancy. So, carry a baby. And birth a baby. Running out of room here. But overall, both sides, same thing, reproduction. So for your males, of course, they have their urethra. So we all know about the hole. They have their penis, their testicles, all that such. So more specifically, sperm is made in the testes, as you guys have probably learned all this in family life. I'm sorry if I'm being repetitive. Sperm is made here. It then moves into the epididymis. This is all housed in the scrotum, by the way, which is this nice outer layer around the testicles. It then comes through the vas deferens and up here to the prostate. People like to think that the prostate does not have a function. It actually does. So your prostate helps make some of the fluid that sperm are suspended in. So it helps make semen with your seminal vesicle. Seminal vesicle puts fluid in here. Your prostate helps generate that. And then once they go to ejaculate, it then comes out this way. At the urethra and through the penis. So on the same side of that coin, with their bladder, they have a straight in and out. So bladder's here, they need to pee, comes straight out through here, urethra, and straight out. Of course, we know what an anus is, we don't need to talk about that. So that's not part of the reproductive system. So for us females, we're a little more complicated. So people have kind of this misconception that this right here is connected. This is actually not connected. So we're going to talk about a disease later on called endometriosis, and it's whenever menstrual tissue is placed anywhere outside the uterus. So you could actually have menstrual tissue buildup in your fallopian tubes, on your ovaries. Because your fimbriae on both sides are not attached, you can actually have endometriosis scarring in your abdominal cavity. It can attach to your bladder, it can attach to the outside of your uterus, it can attach to anywhere in your peritoneal cavity. And it's super painful, and it can cause a lot of organ dysfunctions. So I just want to make you guys aware of it before we get to it. But anyway, so ideally, egg starts here. Hopefully the egg gets released into your fallopian tube, goes throughout. Hopefully you do not get pregnant somewhere in here, because you can actually have what's called an ectopic pregnancy. So you could actually have conception happen outside of the uterus. So if you hear ectopic pregnancy, it means the baby was conceived somewhere not in the uterus. It could be somewhere out here in the abdominal cavity, or it could be in your fallopian tubes. So just keep that in mind. Once the egg makes it through here, if someone has sexual intercourse, and of course sperm being involved, they can make their way up here, fertilize the egg, and it would ideally implant inside the uterine wall. And then, of course, the baby grows and forms over 9 months. The cervix gets a mucus plug so that fluid doesn't leak out. After 9 months of the baby developing, it then shoots that plug out, and then you go into labor. Baby comes out through the vaginal canal, and then out through your labia, which are your outside. And then I just gotta talk about it because it's here. Your clitoris. This is where we get our pleasure from the female perspective. And of course, your bladder is right in front of your uterus. So all this is kind of right here together. The clitoris actually has more nerve endings in it than a whole penis. So that one little spot is actually a lot more nerve endings. In case you didn't know that. I know, cringy facts from your instructor. Alright, blood. So it kind of has its own system here. So parts of your blood include plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So these all work together to transport oxygen through your body, protect against pathogens, and promote clotting to control bleeding. So your blood is actually about 55% plasma. That's this nice yellow stuff that looks like straw. So this stuff is mostly proteins, and it's just there to help keep your blood cells suspended and give them something to float around in. Your white blood cells, these help fight infection, and your platelets are there to help clot. So platelets are very important for blood clotting because they have the stuff on them called fibrinogen, and fibrinogen helps these stick together and form, I keep saying clots, well, it is the proper term. I'm trying to think of a better comparison for you guys. But they pretty much weave together and form a shield to help protect the inside of the body from the outside world once healed. And then your red blood cells, these help transport oxygen using heme, H-E-M-E, and your heme molecules help you carry oxygen. So this is just to give you an idea of the many types of red and white blood cells there are. You don't have to know them specifically unless you just want to for these intents and purposes. Alright, so this is a YouTube video you guys can go and look up. I can't play it because I myself am doing a video. So if you get a chance, just go look this up. It's pretty interesting. Alright, anatomical position. We talked a little bit about this at the very end of med term. So this is your person standing with their palms facing forward, standing straight up, and their hands are at their side. So we've already talked about the midline and where your medial is. It's straight down the center. That is not a very straight line. But you know what? It's close enough, and I'm not an artist. I will never claim to be. Your planes of positioning. So transverse. Remember, this is looking at the body in halves from the trunk into top and bottom halves. So this is cutting somebody like this. Sagittal. This is looking at the right and left half of the body at the midline. So that goes like this. And then your frontal or coronal plane is the body being divided into front and back segments. So this would be you being divided down your side at the mid-axillary line. So remember, that's your armpit. Here are your pictures for reference again. So sagittal goes down the midline. Frontal divides you into front and back halves. Transverse cuts you in half at the trunk. Anterior or ventral is your front. Posterior or dorsal, like that dorsal fin on a dolphin or a shark, as I talked about in the last slides, means back. Superior means vertical or above something. Vertically above something, I should say. Inferior is vertically below something. So if I were to say that your head is superior to something, I'd say it's probably superior to your chest or to your arms. Versus if I want to talk about your legs, they are inferior to your trunk. So proximal, think about close proximity to something. They're close to the torso. Something that is distal is far from the torso, or think about distance, putting distance on something. Palmar, it has the word palm in it. Please. This is one of the easiest terms you'll ever see. It refers to the palm of the hand. Plantar, think about planting your feet. So this is the sole of your foot. Anytime you see cranial, this is talking about your head. Anytime you see caudal, this refers to the tail. And by the way, yes, we did have tails once, according to evolution. But anyway, whether you believe that or not, it's up to you. So these are the same positioning slides that I showed you in the last slideshow. So anterior or ventral is in the front, posterior or dorsal. Let's make this a shark person. Whee! Is in the back. So superior means above, inferior means below, medial is in the middle, lateral, if you see lateral, it means out to the side. Distal is more distant from the body. Proximal is closer to the body. Superficial means it's on the surface. And then deep, of course, means deep within. So unilateral means one side. Bilateral being both sides. Ipsilateral. So I think this one's new from the last slideshow. This means that it's on the same side. So if I tell you that your left arm is ipsilateral to your left nipple, they're on the same side. Contralateral, this is on the opposite side of the body. So your right arm is contralateral to your left arm. Mid-axillary, remember this is the line that runs up the side of the body where your armpit is. Mid-clavicular, this talks about going midway of the clavicle, or it's also the nipple line. Alright, so flexion. This is the bending of a limb or joint that decreases the angle between the two. So to flex means to bend. Extension, this is the bending of a limb or joint that increases the angle between the two parts. So flexion is to the body. Extension is away from the body. Abduction, so this is moving away from the midline or taking away from the body. Think about somebody being abducted. Adduction, you're adding to the body. So you're bringing something towards your midline. So if you bring your arm towards your chest, you're adding to your body. Adduction. So here's your visual for it. Abduction, away from the body. You see this guy moves his arms away from the body. Adduction, he's adding his arms to his body, making himself bigger. Adduction. So plus, minus. Extension means you're moving away from the body. Flexion, you are bringing it to the body. Alright, so body cavities. Of course, your cranial vault. This houses your brain. Your spinal cavity. This houses your spine. Some of these are kind of self-explanatory, if you get my drift. Thoracic. This houses your trachea, lungs, thymus, heart, and diaphragm. So this is your chest. I don't know what that line was. I just failed at life. Anyway, so your abdominal cavity. This houses your liver, gallbladder, pancreas, stomach, kidneys, spleen, ureters, small intestine, and large intestine. So basically, this is everything in your belly. Your pelvic cavity. This houses your bladder, your internal male reproductive structures, the internal female reproductive structures, ureters, and urethra. So this is everything in your pelvis, pretty much. So peritoneal, or abdominopelvic cavity. This houses everything in the abdominal and pelvic cavities. So this takes these two right here, and they form the peritoneal cavity together. They kind of do a fusion dance if you watch Dragon Ball Z. Don't hate me. I have a lot of pop culture references, and I'm just a dork. By the way, if you guys are complete dorks like I am, and you watch anime in any way, shape, or form, there is a great one called Cells at Work. And even if you're not like a big cartoon person or care about anime at all, this is a great show. It is on Netflix. It actually gives you a very good idea of how some of the smaller cells work in the body. Like, it features red and white blood cells, it features infections, all sorts of different ways the body functions. And they're constantly coming out with new seasons. I highly recommend people to watch Cells at Work, especially if they're just getting a basis of anatomy and physiology. It's a great show, it's funny, it's cute, it's really medically accurate. Anyway, so back to body cavities. So your cranial cavity, this houses your brain. Your thoracic cavity, this is everything in your chest. Abdominal cavity, everything in your belly. Your pelvic cavity, which looks very large on this guy over here, but on this person over here, you can see it's actually pretty small. So it only houses everything in that immediate area. And then, of course, your peritoneal cavity is the combination of these two, or your abdominopelvic cavity, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. Both are correct. Your abdominal quadrants, I told you guys in the last set of slides you would see this again. So imagine a crosshair basically on your abdomen. So your right upper quadrant has your liver, your right kidney, your colon, your pancreas, and your gallbladder in it. Your left upper has your liver, spleen, stomach, left kidney, colon, and pancreas. Your right lower has your right kidney, colon, small intestine, ureter, appendix, and bladder. Your left lower has your left kidney, small intestine, colon, ureter, and bladder. So remember, just draw that crosshair and remember which abdominal quadrant has what. This will become important when we get to GI emergencies. It will also become even more important in abdominal trauma. Abdominal trauma is one of those types of trauma that is not well recognized. And the problem with that is there's so much in here that can bleed, and it takes forever to bleed out. You can actually hold 3 liters in your abdominal cavity before you start feeling any pain or noticing any change. And just to give you an idea, we have 5 liters of blood as females. And then if you're male, you have 6 liters at most. So it just kind of depends. But that's either more than half or half of your blood content being in your belly before you may even show signs. So please get an idea of what organs are in here, in these quadrants. So back to positioning. I promise, guys, we're almost done. If they're laying supine, they're lying on their back. Prone, they're lying flat on their face or on their abdomen. Recovery, they're lying on left or right. Either one is correct. And they have whichever arm you're going to lay them on. So if you're going to put them on the right side, put their right arm straight up. This helps keep their airway open, and it helps keep them from choking. This is preferred in your unconscious, non-traumatic patients. Fowler's position is sitting straight up. Semi-Fowler's is anything less than an 80 or 90 degree angle. And it's leaning back in a semi-sitting position. So they're reclined. And then sitting is when the body's weight is supported by the buttocks and torso is sat straight. Your shock position is laying supine with the legs elevated 6 inches, which, like I also told you, is Trendelenburg. I am probably going to butcher the spelling. I am pretty sure I spelled that incorrectly, but you get the point. We don't do Trendelenburg very often. Like, honestly, I'm technically supposed to tell you not to use it at all. But you will still see some older providers utilize it. Just remember, if you use it and you put their legs down, you're going to equal the water back out. Because if you're laying like this, and then you elevate their feet, all that fluid shift is going back this way. But when you lay these legs back down, their fluid's going to shift back out straight. So just keep that in mind. And then here are your positions again. Remember this position right here, your birthing position, is called Sims position. Or lithotomy. Position. This is Trendelenburg. Oh, I was close. If I had just put a U instead of an E for Berg, I'd have had it. Anyway, so here's your prone, your supine, your right lateral, Fowler's, left lateral, Trendelenburg. Sims or lithotomy position is this birthing position. This is your recumbent, right or left. This particular guy is on his left. And then, like I said, this is Trendelenburg up here. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or Miss Lore, and we will go over this with you. I do have a degree in biomedical sciences. This is kind of my baby. But we're going to be doing more in-depth anatomy with each body system and each medical and or trauma issue with each one. So don't freak out. I know it seems like a lot of information. It is, and it's a lot at once. But you guys only have to have a basic understanding of things. You don't have to have this super critically in-depth understanding of pathophys, anatomy, and physiology. You just need to know the bare bones basics of it. Alright,